And if we figure out ways to argue our case and tweak results, we won't be around for much longer. The point that Joanna is making based on Clayton Christensen's tactical companies is that, are you off? Are you going? It gets better. It gets better. And the point she makes is we need to be ready for change. And in some cases, that's change that we're going to be doing ourselves. And in other cases, it's change that we're going to be ready for to respond to the business. So I don't know how many of these things are familiar to you. But this is my snapshot of some of the things in terms of technology and how technology is changing the landscape. So there's a man called Crowdcheck. Has anybody come across Crowdcheck? Say, yes, Steve, or no, Steve. Say, I'm still here, Steve. We're still out here. So Crowdcheck, he says his big argument is that, or point that he makes, Crowdcheck, is that not everything is the same. When you're buying, not everything is the same. So Crowdcheck says some things are routine. Some things are routine items that, quite frankly, when you've been in procurement for a little while, you get a little bit fed up with. Some things are strategic, and they're the ones where we need to invest our time. Partnership relationships. They're the big, highly complex, highly important spend items. There are things that are difficult, called bottleneck items, and then there's what he calls leverage items. So he splits up our spend base into four. And he says you can adopt different approaches to all four. The one that our professional body, the CIPS, talk a lot about is partnering. But Crowdcheck says, don't worry, not everything is all about partnering. You don't always have the time. So based on that, in the routine items, you can see things like purchase to pay. Anybody implemented Ariba, SAP? I don't know if you're saying, hi Steve, how are you? So we've got a few purchase to pay implementations. So routine items, they're called catalogs that you can put up and people can draw down on that. So purchase to pay suits routine items. You can also, with the leveraged items, use e-auctions, reverse auctions they're called, to bid. And there's a whole suite of strategic sourcing tools available to you. I'm also seeing a big rise in the amount of contract. I did a course recently on fast contracting. How do we get contracts into place quicker? Which was interesting. It was an interesting few days in the financial services sector. And we're seeing tools there for compliance, for contract management databases. So I don't know how many of you have come across some of these technologies. I don't know how many of you, if you are coming across them, are experiencing them in a big step change, what they sometimes call big bang approach, or a strategic approach with, shall we say, the same provider, or whether you're seeing that a little bit incremental, a little bit, if I may say, dysfunctional. So you might buy your contract database over here from one provider, your purchase to pay from somebody else, and then IT have to try to glue it all together. And sometimes finance will put pressure on you because their finance system needs to be cohesive, and that's the more dominant argument. So with change, the tools are there. Some of them are good. Some of them are not so good. They're a bit basic. Some of them are from a complete suite of tools, and others are just standalone. So change is interesting. It's not just one-dimensional. It comes at us from many different ways. When we're dealing with change, we also need to not just think about it. It's not all about it. Sometimes when you read and you go online and you download articles, or if you read things like supply management, you might be forgiven for believing it's all about digital and all about technology. But equally, we need to be thinking about the way the world's changing. What's happening in the world. So this is, I'm sure some of you will have come across PESTLE. It used to be PEST, and then someone had the bright idea to add a couple of more letters to it. I'm sure they got some sort of copyright on that. And this is STEEPLE. It's the same kind of thing. It just gives us, by the way, I'm Steve Wills, so remember that for your feedback forms. He was very good. We'd like to see him again. So STEEPLE gives us a list of, just like PESTLE does, change factors. So 3 of them that I've highlighted there. We've already discussed a little bit the technology one. Environmental is another. There's a huge movement which has been kicked off about 12 months. Anyone? Hang on a minute. I've just got a photo opportunity over here. About 12 months ago, something called Blue Planet. Yeah? With Mr. So, what are you putting your hand up for? Just to say I've seen it or I know it? Yeah? Okay. I'll see you for a coffee later. All right. And Blue Planet. Plastics. So huge environmental issue, and people now are designing out. I worked with IKEA recently, designing out plastic, replacing it with alternatives. Is that something that's happening in your sectors? Are you seeing a change? So you can see that environmental movements can shape and create change on what we do. I've mentioned, I don't know if I told you, but I'm from the UK, and Brexit is a big, big issue. And so political matters. Donald, Mr. Trump, he has moments. He has moments when he's not taking medication, and sometimes world politics can have an impact. You think it's happening in another land, far away, but it does have repercussions. His policy to kickstart the economy in the States had an impact on globalization. Whether Ford were going to do that and the other car manufacturers anyway, but he was very quick to claim that he'd had a word in the ear of Ford and that they would remain in the US of A. And that obviously had an impact in other parts of the world. And legislation impacts us as well. So we need to be thinking about all of the aspects that come out of PESTLE and STEEPLE, and we need to be thinking about these in the longer term disruption of the world, if you like. It's a big subject, but when you've got supply chains that are critical to your business, you need to be thinking about these things to avoid disruption, delays, and materials that are held up in parts of the world. The other thing that it's useful to help us with change is Michael Porter, and he has something called the 5 forces, and he talks about market disruption, and he talks about having power if you're a buyer. So if you're a monopoly, you clearly have a lot of power over your suppliers if you're very dominant. A monopsony, if you're equally, has a great deal of power. Are there new substitutes? Are there threats coming into your sector? Are there new entrants? So again, Porter talks about his 5 forces and talks about how the market is being disrupted through changes that come about. And again, we should be aware of that, and we should be thinking about this in the longer term. And I've just included some of the risks. These are all obviously all added value. These are all added value fields, more than the things that we probably sometimes get thought of in procurement, in terms of price, in terms of cost, and taking cost out. These are all additional things that we don't always get the credit for. So I've mentioned disruption in our supply chains. A supplier that fails us, a supplier that probably is unethical, can have a bad impact on us. It can create bad publicity for us. Our costs increase. We could lose competitive advantage. So in our prediction of the future, we need to future-proof supply chains against disruption and the impact of risks. So we need overall to think about our future vision. We need to be in a position where we're not a reactive function, that's for sure. We need to be on the front foot. We need to have some strategic planning, some strategic tools, some strategic thinking. We need to be a proactive leader. We need to be a business partner. We're not a support service. So by 2030, I don't want to be hearing people talking about we're a support service. We're not. We're a business partner. We play a critical role right across the business that no one else does. And of course, it's not just about a negotiation. It's about how we maneuver ourselves away from that. That's one of our roles. But also to protect the business against risk, protect the business against imperfect disruption. And overall, I would say we create value. That's what we do. So today, those things are illustrated in what we do. We are in a space, I suppose you could say. We wear the procurement hat, and we're in a space for cost control, managing risk, and a little bit of innovation in our supply chain. We talk about how we can work with finance to manage and control budgets, achieve efficiency, streamline processes, focus on the supplier's products and services for sure, but look